The security footage would later show 8.3 seconds. That is all the time it took for one girl, 5 feet 4 inches tall, 17 years old, holding a plastic McDonald's tray to put 5 Division I football recruits on the floor of a fast food restaurant in Greenwich, Connecticut. The manager already had his hand on the phone before the first body fell. A strawberry milkshake painted the ceiling tiles in slow, deliberate arcs, like something from a modern art installation that nobody had asked for. French fries scattered across the linoleum in every direction. Roman Ashford, the quarterback who had thrown 43 touchdown passes the previous season and been featured on the cover of 2 regional sports magazines, lay curled on the ground, cradling an arm that would require 3 separate surgeries to rebuild. Brick Holloway, 280 pounds of recruited muscle, made sounds near the counter that resembled a broken accordion trying to remember a song it had forgotten. Rafferty Maddox clutched his knee and screamed in a register that surprised even him. The girl sat in the booth where she had started. She picked up a chicken nugget. She examined it briefly the way a scientist might examine a specimen of moderate interest. Then she took a small, precise bite and looked out the window at the parking lot where the first siren was already approaching from the east. Her expression did not change. The timestamp on the security footage read 3:56:14 p.m. when Roman's hand made contact with her hair. By 3:56:22.3 p.m., it was over. Cut to 21 days earlier. The morning Vera Sinclair arrived at Hargrove Academy, the September light was doing something complicated with the Gothic stonework above the main entrance, throwing shadows that made the archway look older than it was. She paused for exactly 3 seconds at the bottom of the front steps. Not from nervousness. She was counting exits. There were 4 camera blind spots visible from where she stood. 2 side paths that ran along the building's eastern wall and disappeared into landscaped hedges that could conceal a person moving at speed. 1 maintenance door on the far left that opened outward, she could tell by the hinges, and would take roughly 1.8 seconds to clear if the bolt was not thrown. A ground floor window on the second classroom from the right that someone had propped open with what appeared to be a calculus textbook. She filed all of it without writing anything down. She had been doing this since she was 11 years old. By now it was as automatic as breathing. The leather satchel over her shoulder cost more than most of the cars in the student parking lot. This was intentional. Everything about Vera Sinclair was intentional. The platinum hair caught September light in the way her handlers had noted when they chose the cover identity, visible, memorable, and completely at odds with what was underneath. The way she moved was the ballet story, fluid, controlled, the kind of physical grace that suggested years of training in a form that was decorative rather than dangerous. Nobody looks twice at a ballerina. The admissions file read former student at the Prague Conservatory. Father employed in diplomatic services, currently stationed in Brussels. Mother deceased. Seeking enrollment following a vague academic scandal involving leaked examination papers at her previous institution. The scandal had been carefully invented to be exactly embarrassing enough that nobody would want to discuss it further. The donation that accompanied the application had been substantial enough that nobody at Hargrove's admissions office questioned the story at all. What the file did not contain her father's real name, which appeared in no database accessible to civilians and most government personnel. His actual occupation, which had involved 20 years of eliminating threats to NATO operations across 6 Eastern European countries. The 3 men who had been found dead in a Vienna alley 3 years ago, whose files were still technically open. The fact that Vera had broken an attacker's arm in 4 places outside a coffee shop when she was 14 and had then helped clean up the scene while her handler drove through traffic to reach her. What the file also did not contain Budapest. She did not think about Budapest if she could help it. Vera walked up the steps at 7:47 a.m., 13 minutes before first period, precisely calibrated, early enough to observe, late enough to avoid standing out. She pushed through the heavy front doors and immediately began building the interior map. Main hallway, 80 feet slight, dogleg at the far end. Lockers on both sides, creating partial visual obstruction. 2 teachers visible, both moving away from her. Security camera at the hallway intersection ahead, angled at 15 degrees downward, leaving a triangular blind spot roughly 4 feet wide near the left wall. She walked through the blind spot without appearing to choose it. Her assigned locker was in the east corner, second from the end. She tested the lock 3 times, checking for resistance in the mechanism, and found one small weakness in the second tumbler that she filed away as potentially useful. Then she took out her first period textbook, closed the locker with the same force she had used to test it, and went to find her classroom. By the end of her first day, she had mapped every floor, identified the library's second floor corner table as the single best defensive position in the entire building, back to the wall, clear sight lines to both staircases, and the emergency exit concealed behind a portrait of Hargrove's founder, and eaten lunch alone in an empty classroom without anyone noticing she was there. She had also read the file on Roman Ashford 17 times in the weeks before her arrival and spent the day confirming that every detail was accurate. There is a particular kind of boy that prep schools produce when the conditions are exactly right. Give him a father with enough money to rewrite consequences. Give him 4 years of being told, explicitly and implicitly, that the rules that govern other people do not apply to him. Give him the physical gifts, the height, the jaw, the effortless athleticism that made coaches and administrators and parents look at him and see something worth protecting. Give him the intelligence to understand that what he is doing is wrong, and give him enough social insulation that this understanding never once cost him anything. What you get is Roman Ashford, 6 feet 2 inches, 17 years old, the kind of bone structure that belonged in front of a camera rather than a playbook. He had started at quarterback for Hargrove since his sophomore year, and in 2 seasons had broken every passing record in the school's history. His father, Senator William Ashford, had graduated from Hargrove 31 years earlier and donated enough annually to ensure that certain reports were filed away rather than acted upon, and certain records remained sealed rather than examined. 3 girls had transferred out of Hargrove in the 2 years preceding Vera's arrival. The official reasons were varied family relocation, academic fit, personal circumstances. The actual reason was the same in all 3 cases, and everyone who paid attention already knew it, and nobody with the power to act had chosen to use it. Roman moved through Hargrove like a current, not loud, not aggressive in the obvious way, but impossible to resist if you were caught in it. He had a system. 4 years of refinement had made it close to perfect. First, the charm, offensive flowers, exclusive invitations, the implied promise that proximity to Roman Ashford was a form of social elevation that most people at Hargrove would have sold something significant to obtain. When that failed, and it rarely did, came the second phase, isolation. Suddenly, study groups were full. Tables in the dining hall were mysteriously occupied. Teachers developed a selective blindness to certain raised hands. Most people cracked within a week. The few who lasted longer encountered the third phase, which Roman privately called pressure testing, and which his crew was specifically assembled to perform. The crew was 4. Brick Holloway went first because he was impossible to miss. 6 feet 5 inches and 280 pounds, already secured a full athletic scholarship to Alabama, his physical presence functioning as a constant ambient statement about what was and was not possible. He was not cruel in any complex way. He simply made people feel small, and he was very good at it, and he had never once been asked to stop. Rafferty Maddox was the one who had never been suspended, despite a trail of bruised ribs and twisted ankles that followed him through 3 years of playing safety on Hargrove's defense. He had a gift for making violence look accidental, a gift for timing contact in ways that stayed within the technical boundaries of the rules, while consistently producing outcomes that should not have been possible within those boundaries. Off the field, the gift translated. Preston Hale was not physically imposing and did not need to be. His father held 40% of Hargrove's board seats and had enough documented leverage on the remaining 60% to ensure unanimous votes on matters the family cared about. Preston's presence in any situation meant institutional protection. It meant complaints would disappear. It meant that whatever happened would be handled at a level that never appeared on any official record. And then there was Theron Crane. Theron was the smallest of the 5, barely clearing 6 feet, and he was by a significant margin the most dangerous. Where the others operated through physical presence or institutional leverage, Theron worked in the psychological space, the territory of perception, reputation, and slow-building dread. His juvenile records were sealed as Preston's father had arranged. But there were whispers about a middle school teacher who had failed him and subsequently spent 3 months receiving untraceable messages that cataloged her daily movements in careful, precise detail until she stopped coming to work and did not come back. Nobody could prove anything. Nobody had tried very hard. Together, they were what other students called the Hargrove Five, though never in a hallway and never with a microphone nearby. They had been operating since Roman's freshman year. They had never been held accountable for anything. They noticed Vera Sinclair during her second week. She was walking through the dining hall with a tray, moving with that particular fluid efficiency that caught the light wrong, too controlled for a nervous new student, too precise for someone simply carrying lunch. Roman's eyes tracked her the way they had tracked every person who had caught his attention over 4 years, already calculating without having decided anything yet. New Girl Brick said, his voice carrying the low rumble of someone who treated observation as performance. Theron was already on his phone. He had access to channels that should not have been available to a 17-year-old, but Preston's family connections opened doors that were supposed to require federal clearance to approach. He read from the screen without looking up. Vera Sinclair, Prague, diplomatic family, clean academic record. Then he paused. No social media. None at all. Everyone had social media. The complete absence of it meant one of two things: either someone was extraordinarily private or someone had something worth hiding. Theron leaned forward slightly. Both possibilities interested him for different reasons. Roman watched Vera move to a table near the back wall, set her tray down, open a book, and begin eating with the unhurried focus of someone who was entirely comfortable being alone. He had seen nervous new students, and he had seen students pretending not to be nervous, and he had seen students who were actually comfortable. She was the third kind. It was unusual. She is mine, he said, the same way he might have announced a preference in any other minor decision, as if her autonomy was simply a variable that had not been updated yet. The campaign began the next morning. White orchids appeared at her locker. The accompanying card, written in Roman's practiced calligraphy, offered coffee at a restaurant in Greenwich that had no sign and served senators and professional athletes and people whose names appeared in certain publications. The implication was clear. This invitation was a form of elevation, and elevation was what most people wanted. Vera read the card once. She dropped it in the hallway trash without altering her expression. She left the orchids in the locker, where they would spend the next 3 days, wilting in the dark. Roman watched from the far end of the corridor. His jaw moved slightly. He was recalibrating. More flowers came. An invitation to Senator Ashford's campaign fundraiser, where she could meet people whose decisions shaped the lives of millions. Box seats at a concert his mother patronized. Each offering slightly more significant than the last, the way a negotiation escalates toward a number that one party considers impossible to refuse. Each one ignored or discarded without visible emotion. By Thursday of the first campaign week, his crew had begun to notice. The whispers started in the locker room, careful quiet, because Roman was standing 20 feet away, about the new girl who had not responded to anything, about whether his approach was losing its effect, about what it meant that someone had simply continued going about her day as if he did not exist in a way that registered as meaningful. His jaw tightened. His eyes went flat in the way that preceded decisions. Phase 2, he said on Friday morning. The isolation began the way it always did, gradually and then completely. Vera arrived at the library's second-floor corner table on Monday morning to find it occupied by a study group that had materialized from nowhere and showed no signs of leaving. The computer lab was fully booked every time she approached for the next 4 days. Her name disappeared from the sign-up sheet for the advanced physics lab, forcing her to work through the equipment during lunch when the room was empty and unlocked. She adapted without complaint. She ate in empty classrooms, worked in the gaps between occupied spaces, completed every assignment with the methodical precision that had been built into her over years of operating in environments that were specifically designed to be hostile. The isolation felt familiar in a way she had no language for yet. She had been moving between countries since before she could properly read a map. She had lived in safe houses and compounds and carefully arranged apartments in 6 different cities. Always new schools, always temporary enrollment, never anywhere long enough to form the kind of connections that left a mark. The library corner table was gone. She found 3 other positions with acceptable sightlines and rotated between them. If anyone expected visible distress, they did not find it. What they found on the occasions when they looked directly at her was a girl who was entirely self-contained, who sat in empty rooms and worked through problems that would have challenged graduate students, whose handwriting was so precise it looked typeset, who ate her lunch with the focused economy of someone treating food as a fuel requirement rather than a social activity. She was beautiful in the particular way of someone who is unaware that they are supposed to use it or has decided not to. She was fluent in 7 languages, though nobody at Hargrove knew this yet. The other students wrote her off as another international student lost in the adjustment. Beautiful but cold, worth looking at, not worth pursuing. Roman did not write her off. Roman watched and recalculated. It was during this period on a Tuesday afternoon, when the library held maybe a dozen students scattered across 3 floors, that Vera was deep in a calculus problem, genuinely engaged, her pencil moving in small certain marks when 5 shadows fell across her work simultaneously. She did not look up. They had positioned themselves with what she recognized as practiced efficiency. Roman, directly across the table, pulling out the chair. and sitting down uninvited. Brick behind her left shoulder positioned to make her feel enclosed. Rafferty at her right. Preston blocking the path to the main staircase with the casual confidence of someone who expected the obstruction to be sufficient. Theron near the emergency exit, the one behind the founder's portrait that most students did not know existed. They had blocked what they believed were all 4 exits. They had miscounted. The library has a quiet policy, Vera said without looking up from her problem. Roman leaned forward. The cologne was aggressive and expensive, designed to fill a room. We are not a distraction. We are an opportunity. He settled into the chair with the ease of someone who had never been asked to leave anywhere. You are new, so you do not understand how things operate here. This school runs on relationships. The right friends open the right doors. She finished the line she was writing, set down her pencil. Then she raised her eyes and looked at him with an expression that was the complete absence of the reactions he was accustomed to receiving. No nervousness, no tentative hope, no performing indifference. Just direct, calm assessment, the way a professional might look at a piece of equipment they were deciding whether to use. I understand exactly, she said. You want something I am not interested in providing. You are accustomed to getting what you want through intimidation that is dressed as generosity. That is the entire structure of what you are doing. Brick made a sound that started as a laugh and converted itself into a cough when Roman looked at him. Roman's voice dropped into what he considered his serious register, the one that had produced tears in 3 freshmen and caused 2 transfer applications. My father owns judges in this state. My mother controls half the school board. I decide who builds something at Hargrove and who disappears. That is not a threat. That is a description of how things work. Vera picked up her pencil and returned to her calculus problem. Are you finished? This is due tomorrow. The silence that followed was the longest the 5 of them had ever experienced in the execution of this particular process. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. In 4 years of operating this way, no target had ever simply returned to their homework. They argued, they cried, they offered compromises, they appealed, they eventually came around. They did not treat the conversation as an interruption to more important work. Theron stepped slightly closer, his head tilting in the way that indicated he was building a profile. You are not afraid. That is unusual. Most people grasp self-preservation by this point in the conversation. Vera set her pencil down again. She looked at each of them in sequence, letting her gaze settle on each face for exactly the amount of time needed to make them slightly uncomfortable. Theron last and slightly longer. Fear requires an actual threat, she said. What you are is 5 teenage boys who have confused inherited advantages for personal capability. That is not frightening. It is just a particular kind of sad. She began packing her materials. Books into bay in order of size. Pencil into case. Notebook closed. Each movement unhurried, deliberate, as if she were alone in the room. You cannot leave, Preston said, shifting his position to make the obstruction more explicit. Roman is not finished. She stood, slung the bag over one shoulder. Actually, he is. She walked toward Preston, not quickly, not aggressively, just with the complete and obvious expectation that he would move. The moment stretched. She got close enough that he could see his reflection in her eyes. At the last possible second, his nerve broke in the specific way that privilege breaks when it encounters something that privilege cannot process, and he stepped aside. Later, he would frame this as a tactical decision, not wanting to be the one to initiate physical contact that could be officially documented. Vera's footsteps were steady on the library's hardwood as she moved toward the staircase. She did not look back. Behind her, Roman Ashford's face had gone through several colors and arrived at something that suggested the invention of a phase that had never been necessary before. The weekend passed quietly. On Saturday morning, Vera was at the public library in downtown Greenwich by 8 a.m. working through a reading list that extended well beyond the Hargrove curriculum into graduate-level material in 3 separate disciplines. She sat with her back to the wall and her eyes available to both entrances and worked for 6 hours with a focus that other patrons occasionally glanced at with a kind of reflexive respect, the recognition of effort so complete it becomes its own statement. She did not see the car parked across the street. Or rather, she saw it. She simply had not yet decided what it meant. A dark sedan, same position for the 3rd hour, occasional glint from a phone or a lens in the driver's window. She filed it without reacting the way she filed everything that had not yet resolved into something actionable. On Sunday, she was at a gym near the train station by 5 a.m. 2 hours of work, cardio strength, flexibility, protocols that would have exhausted athletes training professionally. The gym was empty except for a man in his 50s on a treadmill who looked at her once and then looked away and did not look back. She worked with the concentration of someone for whom the body is a tool that requires maintenance rather than a subject of appearance. She did not use headphones. She never used headphones. In the driver's seat of the car parked outside, Theron Crane documented her routine with the patient attention of someone who understood that information had a different quality from physical force. He noted the environmental check every 30 seconds, the positioning of her water bottle and towel always at angles that required minimal movement to reach, the absolute awareness she maintained of the space around her, even when appearing to be focused entirely on the exercise. These were not the habits of a diplomat's daughter worried about examination scores. He sent a message to Roman that evening. She is not what the file says she is. Monday arrived cold and sharp, the kind of October morning that made everything feel more defined than usual. Vera walked through Hargrove's gate at 7:45 a.m. and moved through the hallway without appearing to notice the anticipatory energy that had accumulated over the weekend. The kind of energy that spreads through an institution when people expect something to happen, conversations that stop a beat too late, phones already unlocked in pockets, eyes that follow without meeting. She noticed all of it. She went to class. She took notes in handwriting that looked generated rather than written. She answered questions with the steady precision of someone who had studied the material far more thoroughly than the questions required. In chemistry, she derived the formula before the teacher finished writing the problem. In English, she provided context for a 19th century reference that the teacher had to verify later on his own time. Second period. She opened her chemistry textbook to the assigned chapter and found 6 photographs tucked between pages 43 and 44. Each one had been taken from a distance that was not casual. The public library, the gym exterior, the walk back to the dormitory on Thursday evening. Her at the corner table through a long lens, the image sharp enough to read the title of the book in her hands. Timestamps were visible in 3 of them, digitally stamped in the lower right corner. Each photo had a single word written on the back in Roman's distinctive, careful hand. "You're never really alone." The girl in the adjacent desk caught a glimpse of the photos when Vera lifted the second one and leaned away slightly. Vera put them back in sequence, stacked them neatly, and placed them in the outside pocket of her bag with the same emotional register she used to file completed assignments. Then she reached into her pencil case and removed a small magnifying lens. She worked through the photographs again, this time methodically holding each one at the specific angle that maximized the resolution of the background details. The 4th photograph had been shot from outside the gym using the reflection in a set of exterior windows to partially conceal the photographer's position. In the lower edge of the reflection, barely legible at normal resolution, but clear under the lens, the face of a watch. Steel case, day-date complication in the subdial. Specific enough to identify the model. Specific enough given what she already knew about each member of the Hargrove Five to narrow the photographer to exactly one person, Theron. Vera returned the lens to her pencil case. She closed the chemistry textbook and returned to her notes. A small expression moved across her face, not fear, not anger, and not the relief of someone who had simply confirmed a suspicion and disappeared quickly. It was the expression of someone who had just received exactly the piece of evidence they needed for a file they had been assembling since before they arrived. Here is what nobody at Hargrove Academy knew about the girl in the second-floor corner table. Her father's real name does not appear in this story because it does not appear in any document that a civilian has ever been permitted to read. What he did for 20 years across Eastern Europe, the operations he ran, and the operations he ended, the names of the people whose paths he permanently altered in the service of objectives that most people will never be cleared to know about. None of that is here. What is relevant is this: from the time Vera was old enough to understand what her father's work actually was, he had been preparing her for a world that did not offer warnings. 17 ways to neutralize a person larger than herself learned before she could drive. 7 languages, each one the key to a different set of rooms. The ability to read a space the way most people read text, quickly, instinctively, extracting the information that mattered and discarding the rest. All of this she carried without visible weight because she had been carrying it for so long that she no longer experienced it as weight. It had simply become the shape of how she moved through the world. Precise, self-contained, prepared. She had not chosen this. It had been chosen for and around her by circumstances that had nothing to do with what she might have wanted in a moment that happened when she was 9 years old in a city that had orange October light and a window that faced east. She still did not think about it if she could avoid it. Sometimes she could not avoid it. Budapest is not something she describes to anyone, but it comes back in fragments that arrive without invitation. usually at night, sometimes in the quiet hours between 3 and 5 in the afternoon, when the library was nearly empty and the light through the windows went golden and indirect, and something in the quality of it resembled a different afternoon in a different city where her mother had been making tea. She was 9. The apartment was what her father called a resting position, not a home, never a home, just a place where they stayed until the work moved elsewhere. Her mother had been in the kitchen. The apartment faced east, and the late afternoon came through the windows at an angle that made everything look warmer than it was. Her mother was on the phone, speaking in the low, careful voice she used when the conversation was important. Then the window changed. Not an explosion in the way that films depict it, not one single dramatic detonation, but something more complex and terrible, a sequence of events that happened faster than comprehension could follow. Her mother's voice stopped mid-sentence. Vera remembers the color of her cardigan. Orange, the exact shade of the October light coming through the eastern window. She remembers the sound. She remembers the way time seemed to have a different texture in those seconds, each fraction of it arriving with abnormal weight and clarity. Then her father's hand on her arm, not gentle, urgent in the particular way that said, "We are not stopping. We are not looking back. Looking back is not a choice we have right now." She never saw her mother's face again after that moment. What she learned from Budapest was not grief. Grief was a thing that required time and stillness, and neither had been available in the years that followed. What she learned was the lesson that has shaped every room she has walked into, since there is no such thing as a safe place by default. There are only places she has evaluated and places she has not evaluated yet. Places where she has identified the exits and places where she still needs to. Hargrove Academy. Exits mapped. Camera blind spots identified. Weaknesses in the locker mechanism noted. The precise relationship between the library's second-floor corner table and the emergency exit behind the founder's portrait calculated on day 1. She is not afraid of Roman Ashford. She has been afraid of things that do not send flowers first. Wednesday evening, the athletic center parking lot. Roman stood at the edge of the building with Theron away from the lights, away from the cameras, whose angles Theron had spent 3 weeks learning. The football team's practice had ended 40 minutes earlier. The campus was transitioning into its evening configuration, study halls, filling dining hall, running through its last service. Theron held his tablet. He had spent the weekend and the following days cross-referencing the records that existed for Vera Sinclair against a wider set of databases. Most of what he found confirmed the cover story. Some of it had a quality that the cover story could not explain. A 6-month gap when she was 14. Complete absence from every system. Not a gap that suggested incomplete filing or administrative oversight, a gap that had the specific clean quality of a deliberate removal. Then a reappearance in Prague under a slightly different surname before the name shifted back to Sinclair within a year. The kind of alteration that appeared in records when someone needed to stop existing temporarily and had access to the infrastructure that made temporary non-existence possible. Vienna 3 years ago. 3 men found dead in an alley near the 7th District. Professional methodology. One partial witness description filed with the local police and then retracted, a teenage girl, light hair, approximately 5 feet 4 inches gone before the first responding unit arrived. The same week, Vera's records developed their gap. Roman read the article on the tablet twice. "So she has secrets," he said. "Everyone breaks when their secrets are threatened with exposure." Theron replied in the flat, analytical tone he used when he was most certain about something. Roman handed the tablet back. He looked across the parking lot at the lights of the main building where somewhere inside Vera Sinclair was completing assignments in handwriting that looked printed with the focused calm of someone who had never once in 3 weeks given any indication that she was anything other than precisely what her file said she was. Thursday, he said, 4 o'clock, McDonald's. The location had been chosen carefully, outside the radius of Hargrove's security system. Enough student traffic for a visible audience, witnesses to whatever Roman decided to present afterward as the definitive account. But not enough adult authority to intervene in a way that would matter before the damage was done. He wanted her humiliated publicly. He wanted the people at school who had watched the orchids go in the trash, who had seen Brick retreat from a cafeteria table clutching his wrist, who had heard about Preston stepping aside in the library. He wanted all of them to see what happened when the institutional weight of the Hargrove Five came down on someone who had been operating as though it did not apply to her. That was Wednesday night. What Roman Ashford did not know, could not have known, and would not fully understand until he watched the security footage from a hospital room weeks later, was that Vera Sinclair had been studying him since before she set foot in his school. That she had read his file, evaluated his methods, and mapped the progression of his approach with the clinical precision of someone who had been doing exactly that kind of work since childhood. He did not know that she had already chosen the booth. He did not know that she had arrived at McDonald's 20 minutes before him on a reconnaissance visit 3 days earlier, measuring table heights and testing floor traction and identifying the precise camera angles that would capture everything without distortion. He did not know that the Happy Meal, the specific deliberate choice of a small child's meal, with the toy still in its wrapper, was a prop, selected to project harmlessness to every witness in the restaurant who had not already seen what she could do. Nobody who watches a girl in a back booth eating nuggets with careful bites expects her to be the most dangerous person in the building. Roman thought he was setting a trap. He was walking into one. Thursday morning, 7:45 a.m. Vera walked through Hargrove's gate and moved through the day with her usual precision. She attended every class. She completed a chemistry problem set during a free period with the focused efficiency that had become her visible signature at this school. She ate lunch in an empty classroom off the East Corridor, working through the final pages of a graduate-level text on applied physics that was not on any curriculum Hargrove offered. She did not look like someone preparing for anything. At 3:34 p.m., she left the building through the side entrance near the east wall and walked the 6 blocks to the McDonald's on Post Road. She arrived at 3:41. She ordered at the counter an Happy Meal chicken nuggets, strawberry milkshake, and carried the tray to the back booth on the right side. She positioned her chemistry textbook at the angle that would read as homework from the entrance. She sat with the wall behind her. She unwrapped one chicken nugget. She began to eat. The manager looked up when she settled in the way he looked up whenever someone took that particular booth, which had a quality he had never fully articulated to himself but recognized reliably. Then he went back to his work. Outside in the parking lot, Roman Ashford's car pulled in at 3:48. 4 doors opened. 5 young men moved across the asphalt with the coordinated certainty of people who had done this kind of thing enough times that it no longer required discussion. The manager saw them through the window. His hand moved toward the phone behind the counter. Not quickly, not with alarm. With the quiet preparatory movement of someone who has learned to have things ready before they are needed. In the back booth, Vera Sinclair did not look up from her homework. She was watching the entrance in the reflection of the window glass, her pencil moving across the chemistry equations with the same steady rhythm it had maintained for the past 14 minutes. Her milkshake stood untouched at the edge of the tray. The toy in its wrapper sat beside the container of nuggets. She had 3 left. She would not finish them. The timestamp on the security footage would later read 3:52:07 p.m. when the door opened and Roman Ashford walked in with the easy ambient authority of someone who had never once entered a room and wondered whether he belonged there. 3:56:14 p.m. when everything changed. But this is not that moment yet. This is the quiet before it. The 14 minutes of a girl in a back booth doing chemistry homework and eating chicken nuggets with unhurried precision, watching 5 young men take their positions in a restaurant they have not properly evaluated, in a situation they have not accurately defined, approaching a target they have catastrophically misread. This is the moment before Roman Ashford reaches across a table and makes the last miscalculation of his athletic career. This is Vera Sinclair doing what she has been doing since she was 9 years old in a city with orange October light and a window that faced east. Waiting, watching the reflection, completely still, like something that has already decided how this ends. The door opened at 3:52:07 p.m. Roman Ashford came in first the way he entered every room, not loudly, not with any obvious performance of arrival, but with the particular quality of a person who had never once walked into a space and wondered whether they belonged there. Behind him came Brick, then Rafferty, then Preston, and finally Theron, who moved to a position near the window that gave him angles on everything without placing him at the center of anything. They spread through the restaurant the way water finds the shape of a container. Practiced, efficient, the product of years of this specific kind of coordination applied in school hallways, in parking lots, and now a McDonald's on Post Road in Greenwich, Connecticut on a Thursday afternoon in October. The manager watched them from behind the counter. His hand was already near the phone. In the back booth, Vera Sinclair did not look up. Her pencil moved across the chemistry equations with the same steady rhythm it had maintained for the past 16 minutes. She had taken 3 bites of her chicken nuggets and was working through a problem involving molecular bond disruption under thermal stress. The Happy Meal toy was still in its plastic wrapper beside the tray. She had not opened it. Roman slid into the booth across from her. The vinyl seat made a sound. He settled in with his elbows on the table and his shoulders squared, the posture of someone who had decided in advance how this conversation would end. Studying hard, he said. She did not respond. He reached across the table and closed her textbook. Slowly, deliberately, the way someone closes a door on something they want ended. Now she raised her eyes. There was a quality to the way Vera Sinclair looked at people that was difficult to describe and impossible to ignore. It was not hostility. It was not the performance of coldness that some people use as a defense. It was something more fundamental than either of those things, the look of someone who has spent years in environments where accurate assessment of another person was not a social exercise, but a survival calculation, and who has never fully turned that off. Roman held it for 2 seconds before something in his jaw tightened. "We are not here to discuss your homework," he said. "Then you are wasting both our time." Theron had positioned himself with his phone angled in a way that appeared casual. Rafferty stood near the side exit, weight shifted forward, hands loose at his sides. Preston had moved to block the main entrance with the confidence of someone who considered his presence its own sufficient argument. Brick stood directly behind Vera's left shoulder, close enough that she could feel the change in air temperature from his presence. She had noted all of this within 4 seconds of Roman sitting down without appearing to look at any of them. Roman leaned forward. "You have been at Hargrove for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of walking past me like I am furniture. 3 weeks of acting like the rules that everyone else understands do not apply to you." He paused, letting the weight of what came next carry its full meaning. "That ends today." Vera picked up a chicken nugget. She examined it with the brief scientific interest she had given the first one. She took a small, deliberate bite and set the remainder down on the tray with precision. "The natural order of things," she said, "implies evolution. Implies that the dominant arrangement is dominant because it is genuinely superior. What you are describing is not natural order. It is inherited position maintained through the credible threat of institutional punishment." She picked up her pencil and tapped it once against the closed textbook. "Those are very different things. One of them is stable. The other one depends entirely on nobody calling the bluff." Several students at nearby tables had their phones out now. Not visibly, not in a way that announced itself, but the slight adjustments of posture and the particular angle of elbows that indicated recording had already begun. Word had spread through Hargrove's student body over the past week, in the incremental, semi-private way that information moved through institutions like this one. People had come here for after-school food and discovered they had arrived at something else. Brick laughed. The sound moved through the restaurant like something structural settling. "She is giving us a physics lesson." Roman's expression shifted into the register he considered dangerous. The one that had preceded over 4 years' outcomes that 3 girls and several boys had found permanently instructive. "Let me explain something simpler." He reached across the table. His hand moved towards her hair with the easy possessive entitlement of someone who had never once in his life had a gesture like that interrupted. His fingers grazed a strand of platinum hair. What happened next took 8.3 seconds. The security footage, which the manager had already begun preserving to a cloud server by the time the second body hit the floor, showed the timestamp at 3:56:14 p.m. when contact was made. Vera's right elbow moved first, not fast in the way that telegraphs itself, not the large committed motion that a person sees coming and has a chance to respond to. Fast in the way that things move when there is no unnecessary component, no wind-up, no announcement, just the endpoint arriving before the setup was visible. The elbow drove backward and upward into Roman's extended arm at the joint, targeting the precise angle where hyperextension became the path of least resistance. The sound his elbow made was not dramatic. It was small and definitive, the sound of something going past the boundary it was designed to stay within. Roman's breath left him in a single involuntary exhalation. The Happy Meal tray was already in motion. Brick had stepped forward the instant Roman made a sound. His body's trained response, 4 years of protecting the quarterback, converting itself into a single committed movement toward the source of the threat. The edge of the plastic tray caught him in the soft tissue directly below the larynx, the precise location where impact produces the specific result of making the body forget temporarily and completely how to coordinate the act of breathing. 280 pounds of recruited muscle folded at the knees with the sudden simplicity of something very large, losing its structural argument with gravity. The floor shook when he landed. A soft serve machine rattled on the counter 6 feet away. Rafferty had abandoned his position at the side exit before Brick reached the floor. His instinct was speed, the same closing velocity that had earned him his reputation on the field, the ability to cover distance before an opponent had finished making the decision to move. He came in fast and certain and completely committed. Vera pivoted on her back heel. She used the edge of the table as a fixed point in space and let her body rotate around it the way a door rotates on a hinge, and her foot connected with Rafferty's knee from the lateral angle that the joint's architecture was specifically unprepared for. The sound the ligaments made was audible in the sudden relative quiet of the restaurant, a sound that cut through the ambient noise of the kitchen and the ventilation system, and the barely suppressed reactions of the students at the nearby tables. Rafferty dropped, and the screaming that came out of him surprised everyone, including himself. Preston had been moving towards her from the entrance, his forward momentum built over several committed steps, his body already past the point of easy reversal. He was not a physical threat in the way the others were. He was a large young man in a panicked state, moving in a direction that physics had already made very difficult to change. Vera stepped to her left exactly the necessary distance, and Preston's own momentum carried him into the corner of the neighboring table with the full weight of himself behind it, and the table did not move, and he did. He was unconscious before he found the floor, a bruise already building above his right temple like a slow purple storm system forming over a ridge. Theron had not moved. He stood near the window with his phone still raised. His face had gone through several expressions quickly and arrived at something that was primarily information processing. He was the one who understood in this moment more than the others did understood that what he was watching was not luck, was not adrenaline, was not the statistical anomaly of someone getting fortunate in a dangerous moment. This was trained. This was specific. This was something that had been built over years into a person who wore it the way other people wore clothes. Vera stepped toward him. She moved with the same unhurried, economical quality that she used to move through hallways and libraries and empty classrooms. She raised her right arm and stopped her elbow at a distance from his carotid artery that he could feel as displaced air against his skin. "Still recording," she said pleasantly. He nodded. He was not certain he could have produced words. "Good. Make sure you get their medical treatment in frame. It helps with the self-defense claim." She lowered her arm. She walked back to her booth and sat down. She picked up the chicken nugget she had set aside earlier, the one she had been halfway through when Roman reached across the table and closed her textbook, and she took the remaining bite. The manager was already on the phone. His voice was steady in the particular way of someone who has been composing himself for a call like this for the entire duration of what just happened. 3 squad cars arrived in 11 minutes. The first officer through the door took in the scene with a slightly slowed, careful assessment of someone making sure he understood what he was looking at before he committed to a version of it. 2 ambulances followed 4 minutes after that. Rafferty was screaming in a lower register by then, the initial shock having settled into the longer, more considered pain of someone beginning to understand the full extent of what his knee had just experienced. Brick had remembered how breathing worked, but was doing it carefully with the focused attention of someone relearning a skill. Preston remained unconscious. Roman sat against the booth seat with his right arm held against his chest, his face a color that did not correspond to any standard emotional state. Students were filming everything. The footage was already uploading to 3 different platforms simultaneously. The tags that were accumulating around the videos had the quality of things that travel fast, compressed, vivid, slightly unbelievable, in a way that makes people send them to other people to confirm that they also see what they think they see. Vera finished her chicken nuggets. She opened the chemistry textbook to the page where she had stopped and found the problem she had been working through before the textbook was closed. She picked up her pencil. Outside, a vehicle pulled into the parking lot that was not a police car and not an ambulance. A dark sedan with no identifying markings, the particular shade of official anonymity. The responding officers glanced at it and then went back to what they were doing in the specific way that indicated they had registered something that told them to go back to what they were doing. The woman who stepped out moved through a parking lot full of emergency vehicles with the direct, purposeful efficiency of someone who had been moving through scenes like this one for long enough that their nervous system had recalibrated what constituted an ordinary environment. She was in her late 30s, dark jacket, no visible badge, not yet, the kind of face that was specifically not memorable, which was itself a kind of achievement. She spoke briefly to the officer nearest the entrance. She showed him something. He stepped aside. She came through the door and walked directly to Vera's booth without looking at any of the 5 young men currently receiving or awaiting medical attention. She sat down across from where Roman had been sitting 40 minutes earlier, in the same seat, and she put a tablet on the table between them. Vera had not looked up. "Systema," the woman said. combined with Krav Maga. The throat strike is textbook Spetsnaz close quarters curriculum. She paused. I am curious where a 17-year-old diplomatic transfer student learned Soviet special forces techniques. YouTube, Vera said, is very comprehensive these days. The woman's expression suggested she found this neither convincing nor particularly amusing. She turned the tablet so its screen faced Vera. It was not the McDonald's security footage. It was a satellite feed. The timestamp on the feed corresponded to the period Vera had been sitting in this booth. The angle was from directly above and slightly west, the kind of resolution that required equipment that had no business monitoring a fast food restaurant in a Connecticut suburb. Vera looked at the feed. She set her pencil down. My name is Dana Mercer, the woman said. On the Hargrove Academy website, I am listed as the new guidance counselor specializing in conflict resolution. She produced a badge case and opened it flat on the table. The shield read Federal Bureau of Investigation. The division designation read Organized Crime. She closed the badge case and put it away. 3 years ago, she continued. Vienna. 3 men found dead in the 7th District. Professional methodology. A partial witness description was given to local police and then retracted. The description included a teenage girl approximately 5 feet 4 inches, light hair gone, before the first unit arrived. That same week, Vera Sinclair's records develop a 6-month gap that resolves in Prague under a name that is not quite the same before converting back. Vera said nothing. 2 years ago, Prague. A trafficking network operating through international student channels gets exposed when detailed financial records arrive at Interpol. The metadata from those records traces back to a public computer terminal at a youth hostel accessed for 11 minutes by someone who checked in and checked out the same night. The hostel's registration log for that date includes a description that matches yours. Vera was looking at the tablet. Her face had the quality it always had, composed, direct, disclosing nothing that she had not decided to disclose. But Dana Mercer had been reading people in rooms like this one for 15 years, and she could see in the set of Vera's jaw and the slight stillness around her eyes that the girl was listening to something other than the words. She was listening for what was underneath the words. What the existence of this particular information in this particular person's possession implied about a situation larger than McDonald's on Post Road. 18 months ago, Dana said. Berlin. A cell planning an attack on a diplomatic conference has its safe house compromised. The only surveillance footage from the relevant window shows a figure matching your height and build exiting the building 4 minutes before it was destroyed in what forensics officially classified as an accidental gas leak. The word accidental carried enough weight in her delivery that it did not need additional comment. You seem to be suggesting something, Vera said. Dana folded her hands on the table. She had the patience of someone who was not at this moment in a hurry. I am suggesting that the name Vera Sinclair is a legal name that covers a history that is considerably more complex than the file submitted to Hargrove's admissions office. I am suggesting that your father's occupation involves considerably more than diplomatic services. And I am suggesting that your reason for being at this school has nothing to do with recovering from a leaked exam paper scandal. Vera looked at her for a long moment. My name is legally Vera Sinclair, she said with the careful precision of someone choosing exactly which statements to make and exactly how to make them. My father does work in diplomatic services, and I am here for education. She paused, just not the kind that is found in textbooks. Dana nodded slowly, as if this were the answer she had expected, or close enough to it. She picked up her tablet, read something on the screen that had arrived since she sat down. Her eyebrows moved by approximately 4 millimeters. Senator Ashford, she said, has already called the governor, the state attorney general, and someone at the Justice Department who takes his calls. He is demanding your immediate arrest on assault charges. She set the tablet down again. Meanwhile, the video footage from Theron Crane's phone has been remotely wiped. The deletion originated from an IP address that does not correspond to any registered device or network in a 3-mile radius. Vera picked up her pencil. I was eating nuggets. It is difficult to hack a phone while eating. The manager's security system. Dana continued, backed up the full footage to a cloud server 40 seconds after the incident began. The server belongs to a company that does not appear in any public business registry, but maintains infrastructure contracts with several organizations whose names are also not in any public registry. She watched Vera's face. It does sound like a fortunate coincidence, Vera said. Dana stood. She reached into her jacket and placed a business card on the table. It was not the one that identified her as a guidance counselor. It was a plain card with a phone number and a small printed symbol in the lower left corner, a symbol that Vera looked at for exactly as long as she needed to confirm what it was, and then looked away from with the neutral expression of someone who has seen a thing they expected to find and is deciding what to do about finding it. The Kozlov Syndicate, Dana said, has been attempting to establish recruitment operations inside American preparatory schools for the past 4 years. Their model is specific: identify students with high institutional potential from families with money and influence and existing connections to systems of power. Begin the process of ideological and behavioral shaping before those students reach positions where their decisions will have significant consequences. Hargrove was their test case. She paused to let that settle. Theron Crane's sealed juvenile record includes connections to Eastern European IP addresses that trace through 3 layers of routing to Kozlov infrastructure. He was first contacted digitally when he was 14 through a form he found while researching psychological manipulation methods. Preston Hale's father has been receiving payments from Kozlov shell companies routed through the Cayman Islands for approximately 2 years. Senator Ashford has been receiving payments to ensure that certain reports about his son's behavior at Hargrove were filed and not acted upon, which served Kozlov's interests because Roman Ashford's behavior was specifically useful to their recruitment evaluation process. Vera was looking at the table, not at her homework, at the surface of the table. Roman doesn't know this, she said. It was not a question. Brick Holloway doesn't know it. Rafferty Maddox doesn't know it. They are material. They are being evaluated for usefulness and shaped accordingly without being told the shape they are being pressed into. Theron knows part of it. Preston's father knows more than his son does. But the full architecture of what Kozlov was building here, no Roman Ashford has no idea that his 4 years of protected behavior were partly the product of a criminal organization that found his particular qualities interesting and made certain investments to preserve them for later use. Vera was quiet for a moment, then she said, "So I accidentally dismantled a recruitment operation." Dana picked up her tablet. Her expression carried the particular quality of someone who is deciding how much of a correction to make. "Not entirely accidentally," she said, and then she walked toward the door past the EMTs working on Roman and the officers managing the scene, and she did not look back. Vera sat in the booth for a long time after that. The restaurant had been cleared of other patrons by then, leaving only law enforcement medical personnel and the careful procedural activity of people documenting a scene. Through the front windows, she could see news vehicles beginning to appear at the parking lot perimeter, drawn by social media traffic that was already generating the kind of numbers that produced editorial decisions quickly. She looked at the symbol on Dana Mercer's card. She had seen it once before in a document that her father had been reading when she came into a room in Prague 2 years ago, and that he had closed with a specific and deliberate casualness that meant it was not meant to be seen. She had remembered it the way she remembered everything, completely involuntarily, filed alongside everything else. What it meant was that the conversation she had just had was not an improvised response to an unexpected event. It was a step in a process that had been in motion before she arrived at Hargrove, before she was assigned here, before possibly her father had agreed to the terms of Project Haven. Someone had placed her here knowing that the Kozlov recruitment operation was active at the school. Someone had put her in the path of 5 young men who were being shaped into criminal assets without their knowledge, in a building with a corner library table that had perfect sight lines to both staircases, in a town with a McDonald's that had exactly the right camera angles for what happened today. She did not yet know whether the person who had done this was her father. She did not yet know whether her father knew. What she knew was this: the 6-month gap in her records, the 3 men in Vienna, the 11 minutes at a hostile computer terminal, the building in Berlin, all of it had been in Dana Mercer's file. Dana Mercer worked for the FBI. The FBI had been coordinating with Project Haven for 4 months before Vera's enrollment at Hargrove. Project Haven was supposed to give her a normal life, a chance to be a teenager without the constant weight of operational awareness, without scanning every room, without training at 5 a.m., without carrying the Budapest years in her body the way she had been carrying them since she was 9 years old. That was what she had been told. She looked at the chicken nuggets, 3 left in the container. She ate one. Outside, the first ambulance pulled out of the parking lot with Rafferty Maddox inside. He would need surgery within 72 hours. The reconstruction would take 3 months. He would not play football again that season, and the scouts who had been watching him would find other names. Brick Holloway was being loaded into the second ambulance. His breathing had stabilized, but his trachea had sustained trauma that required monitoring and would leave a soreness for weeks that reminded him every time he swallowed of something he had not seen coming. Roman was conscious. He was sitting against the base of the booth, his right arm in a temporary immobilization that the EMT had constructed from available materials, his face still carrying the color that had arrived when his elbow gave way and had not departed. He was staring at the floor with the expression of someone whose fundamental model of how the world worked was undergoing structural revision. 3 surgeries, it would turn out. The elbow, a torn rotator cuff from the way he had involuntarily wrenched his arm back, and a 4th smaller procedure related to nerve impingement. He would throw again, eventually. But the 43 touchdowns the magazine covers the Scouts, those were in a different chapter now. One that had effectively closed in 8.3 seconds. Vera finished the last 2 chicken nuggets. She closed her chemistry textbook. She placed it in her bag along with the pencil and the notepad using the same careful sequence she used every time, books in order of size, small items in the inner pocket. She picked up Dana Mercer's card and looked at the symbol in the lower left corner one more time. Then she put it in the outer pocket of the bag where she had put the 6 surveillance photographs on Monday morning. With the evidence. With the things she was keeping. An officer approached the booth with a notepad. He looked at her with the careful neutrality of someone who had watched the footage and was in the process of revising several assumptions simultaneously. She answered his questions with complete accuracy, describing each moment of the 8.3 seconds in precise sequential detail, using the specific vocabulary of force and positioning that made his pen slow down several times as he tried to write fast enough. She described Roman's hand making contact with her hair. She described each response as a response to the exact specific reason that each movement followed from the one before it. She described Theron's position and his recording and the statement she had made to him and why. The officer looked at his notes. He looked at her. Self-defense, he said, with the flat declarative quality of someone who has arrived at a conclusion and is testing whether anyone in the vicinity disagrees. Vera looked at him steadily. I was eating my lunch, she said. He closed his notepad. The 72 hours that followed had the quality of a very large structure that has been holding tension for a long time and is now releasing it all at once. The investigation that Dana Mercer's team opened using the McDonald's incident as its legal premise moved quickly through the layers that Preston Hale's family and Senator Ashford had spent years constructing. Financial records, communication logs, the chain of sealed juvenile files. The shell company payments routed through the Caribbean and into accounts that connected once the connections were traced to infrastructure with Kaslov fingerprints. 43 arrests across 2 states. 3 Hargrove board members, the athletic director, 2 state-level judges who had been filing and forgetting the wrong reports for money that had seemed worth it until the morning federal agents appeared at their offices with documents they had not been given time to prepare for. Senator Ashford resigned from office to spend time with his family. The announcement was made on a Friday afternoon, which is when announcements are made when the people making them are hoping the timing reduces the duration of attention. It did not reduce the duration of attention. The encrypted communications that formed part of the federal evidence package were specific enough about what the senator had known and when he had known it that the resignation was reported as something between an inevitability and a confession. Preston Hale's father fled the country on Thursday, 12 hours before his accounts were frozen. He left behind a son who would spend the next 2 years in the specific legal limbo of someone whose institutional protections have been simultaneously removed and implicated. The 40% of Hargrove's board seats became subject to proceedings that kept a small team of attorneys occupied for 18 months. Theron Crane cooperated. His cooperation was extensive and specific and covered recruitment methodology, behavioral shaping protocols, and the names of 11 other schools along the eastern seaboard that had been identified by Kaslov operatives as suitable for the expansion of the model. In exchange, he entered a federal witness program and departed Hargrove with a new name and a future that would be smaller and safer, and in most ways better than the one he had been being shaped toward. Hargrove Academy survived its administration. The entire leadership was replaced within 60 days. New oversight protocols were implemented with the involvement of federal monitors. Counseling became mandatory for students who had been, in most cases without knowing it, living inside a system designed to identify and exploit them. Vera attended classes throughout all of it. She maintained her GPA. She completed her assignments in the precise typeset handwriting that her teachers had come to recognize as specifically hers. She answered questions that demonstrated comprehension, extending well beyond the curriculum. She ate lunch often in the same empty classroom now by choice rather than exclusion. 3 weeks after the McDonald's incident, She began arriving at the gym 40 minutes early in the mornings and working through a modified curriculum with a small group of students who had heard something and asked something and been given a quiet yes. There were 5 of them at first, then 8. She taught without announcing it, without any formal structure, without the kind of language that would draw attention to what was happening. She taught the way she did everything efficiently, precisely as if the knowledge was something practical rather than anything remarkable. The gym had space. The skills were worth sharing. That was sufficient justification. She did not talk about Vienna. She did not talk about Budapest. She did not talk about the 6 months in the records that corresponded to neither of those places nor any other. She ate lunch. She completed calculus. She watched the exits. And on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 months after 3:56:14 p.m., on a Thursday in October, she walked into a McDonald's on Post Road and sat down in a booth with sight lines to the entrance, the side exit, and the counter. She ordered a Happy Meal. The toy was still in the wrapper when Dana Mercer came through the door without being invited. Dana Mercer sat down across from Vera without asking. This was Vera had come to understand over the past 3 months simply how Dana operated. She did not perform the social rituals that most people use to announce themselves and request permission to occupy space. She arrived. She sat. She began. It was a quality that Vera recognized because she shared it, and recognizing it in someone else produced a particular kind of wariness that was different from the wariness she felt around people whose methods she did not understand. Understanding a method did not make it safe. Sometimes it made it less safe. The McDonald's on Post Road had the particular afternoon quiet of a Tuesday in January, the lunch rush 3 hours gone, and the after-school traffic not yet arrived. 2 elderly men sat at a table near the front window with coffees they had been nursing for the better part of an hour. A woman with a stroller was at the counter. The manager, the same one from October, the one who had already had his hand on the phone before the first body fell, was in the back, and when Vera had come in, he had nodded at her with the careful respect of someone who has witnessed something they will spend years trying to accurately describe. Vera had ordered a Happy Meal. The toy was still in its wrapper. Dana placed a folder on the table between them. She did not open it. She left it there as a fact of the conversation, the way you might set down a tool before explaining what it was for. The work at Hargrove is complete, she said, or as complete as these things get. The board is reconstituted. Federal oversight is in place for the next 3 years. Theron Crane is in a program that will keep him alive and useful in ways that are better than the alternative. The financial trails from the Kozlov shell companies are documented well enough that we have interrupted 4 additional operations in schools we identified from his testimony. Vera was looking at the folder without looking at it. The way she looked at things she was thinking about rather than examining. 11 schools, she said. He identified 11 others. We have addressed 7 of them through administrative channels. 3 more are under active investigation. Dana paused. One of them requires something that administrative channels cannot provide. The folder was still closed between them. Vera picked up a chicken nugget. She ate it in 2 bites, methodical and unhurried, and set the container to one side with the precision of someone making room for a conversation they had not yet agreed to have. Tell me about the 11th school, she said. Blackstone Preparatory, Northampton, Massachusetts. Founded in 1887, enrollment 412 students, all boarding tuition and fees approximately $78,000 per academic year. Dana opened the folder, now turning it so Vera could see the first page. Reputation for producing senators, federal judges, 2 Supreme Court justices, and a statistically improbable number of senior intelligence officials over the past 4 decades. Vera looked at the page, student photos, campus architecture, a map of the grounds with notable buildings identified. 3 students have disappeared in the past 18 months, Dana continued. Not publicly, not dramatically. Each disappearance was processed as a voluntary withdrawal, family relocation, medical leave, personal circumstances. The police reports that were filed in 2 of the 3 cases were reviewed and closed by a detective whose bank account received a payment from a shell company 11 days before each filing. The connection took us 4 months to establish. What are they running there? It is not Kozlov. Dana's voice carried a particular weight on those 3 words, the weight of something that has been compared against a known reference point and found to be different in a way that made it more concerning rather than less. Kozlov was sophisticated. What is operating at Blackstone is smaller in scale and considerably less restrained. They are not building long-term assets. They are running a more immediate operation. Recruitment for a trafficking network that specifically targets students from families with enough resources to pursue disappearances aggressively, which means they are also running an active suppression operation against the families. Vera was looking at the page with the student photographs. Somewhere in the three photographs that documented missing students, her eyes stopped. Not visibly, not in a way that showed, but they stopped. How old, she said. 16, 17, 18, 114. Dana watched Vera's face. The youngest was a freshman, first semester. She had been at Blackstone for 6 weeks when her enrollment was administratively closed for reasons documented as a family emergency. The folder had more pages. Financial records, communication intercepts, a network diagram that showed connections between Blackstone's athletic and administrative infrastructure, and a series of entities whose names did not correspond to any legitimate business category. Vera looked at the network diagram for a long time. Then she closed the folder. The restaurant's ventilation system made a sound it had been making for the duration of their conversation, a low cycling hum that had become part of the ambient texture of the space without either of them registering it consciously, until Vera set her hand flat on the closed folder and the movement produced a silence inside the larger silence that made the hum briefly noticeable. She did not speak immediately. This was not characteristic. Vera Sinclair processed information at a speed that produced responses quickly. Not impulsively, there was nothing impulsive in her, had not been since she was 9 years old, but efficiently. The gap between receiving information and responding to it was typically small enough that people sometimes experienced it as uncanny, as if she had already thought about something before being told it. The gap now was not small. Dana waited. She was good at waiting. "I am tired," Vera said. Her voice had a quality it did not normally carry. Not weakness, the word was wrong, carried the wrong implication. Something more specific. The quality of a weight that has been managed for a very long time and is being for the first time acknowledged as heavy, rather than simply carried. Dana said nothing. Not physical tired, Vera said. She was looking at the table surface. Not at the folder, not at Dana, not at the entrance or the exits or the reflection in the window glass. Just at the flat, plain surface of the table, the way you look at something when you are looking inward and need a neutral surface to look toward while you do it. Not the kind of tired that goes away with sleep. The kind that comes from never being able to sit down anywhere without first checking whether the chair is in a safe position. She paused. "I have not sat in a room in 8 years without knowing where the exits are," she said. "I have not walked down a street since Budapest without running the threat assessment. Not once. I cannot turn it off. I do not know if I ever could have, but now it is simply what I am. And there are days when that is fine, when it feels like what I was built for, and that is sufficient. And there are other days." She did not describe the other days. She did not need to. Dana Mercer had spent 15 years in a career that required her to sit across tables from people in difficult moments and understand what was true and what was performed and what was the particular variety of truth that people disclosed only when they had stopped calculating whether to disclose it. She understood what she was hearing. She understood that this was not a negotiating position. It was not a prelude to a demand. It was a 17-year-old girl who had been carrying a Budapest in her body for 8 years, saying for the first and possibly only time that she was aware of what she was carrying and that it had weight. She did not offer comfort. Comfort would have been wrong. It would have been the wrong shape for what the moment required. She said, "What do you need?" Vera looked up. "There is a girl in Prague," she said. "Her name is Anna Volkov. She is 15 years old. Her father's name was Dmitry Volkov, and he was one of the 3 men who died in a Vienna alley 3 years ago. He was not a civilian. He was not innocent in the way that word usually functions. But he was her father, and when he died, she became something that I understand very specifically. She has been in safe houses since then, moving between them. She has not been enrolled in a school for longer than 6 weeks at a time in 3 years. She has never had a bedroom that belonged to her." Vera's voice was even. It was always even. But the evenness had a different texture now. Not the evenness of someone who does not feel the thing they are speaking about, but the evenness of someone who feels it entirely and has built the muscles to carry it upright. "I want her brought here," Vera said, "to the United States. I want her enrolled in a school with a name that will not change, in an address that will stay the address. I want her to have a room that is hers for longer than a season. I want her to meet someone at school and know that she will still know them in a year." She paused. "I want her to have the thing that Project Haven told me I was coming here for." Dana looked at her for a long moment. The thing Project Haven told you, she said carefully, was not entirely accurate. I know that, Vera said. I have known that for 3 months. But the thing itself, the actual thing, is real. It is possible. Other people have it. I have seen them have it here in this building at tables talking about things that do not matter and will not affect any outcome. And they do not know that what they are doing is extraordinary. Anna Volkov has never had it. She is 15 years old and she has never had it. I want her to have it. Dana closed her eyes briefly. It was not a gesture she made often, and it was over quickly, but it was the gesture of someone doing a rapid internal accounting of logistics, resources, jurisdictions, and the favor-shaped currency of federal interagency operations. Then she opened them. I will make it happen, she said. It will take 60 to 90 days to arrange safely. She will need documentation of placement support infrastructure, but I will make it happen. Vera held her gaze for 2 full seconds. Then she nodded once. Then I will go to Blackstone, she said. She pushed the folder back across the table toward Dana, leaving her handprint briefly visible on its surface before the matte cover absorbed it. She looked at the window. Outside, the January afternoon was the pale, flat gray of a New England winter, the kind of light that made distances difficult to estimate, and everything looked slightly further away than it was. When she said, the semester starts in 3 weeks. Dana picked up the folder. There is a vacancy in the junior class created when one of the missing students was administratively withdrawn. The cover identity is already prepared. We have coordinated with your existing documentation structure, so the continuity is clean. What is the name? Dana told her. Vera repeated it once silently, the way she repeated everything she needed to retain, not because she would forget it, but because repetition was how she made something part of the architecture rather than a note on the surface. She had been doing this since before she could explain why. There is one more thing, Dana said. She did not continue immediately. She was looking at something on her phone with the careful attention of someone reading something they had expected to find and finding it different from the expectation in a small but significant way. Vera waited. There is a new student, Dana said. She came to my attention this morning. Enrolled at Hargrove yesterday as a junior transfer. The name on the documentation is Sable Ivanova. The file describes her as the daughter of an international banking executive based in Moscow. Mother deceased, living with an aunt in Greenwich. The transfer was processed mid-semester, which is unusual, and the file was complete and impeccably documented, which for a mid-semester transfer from a Russian institution is more unusual still. Vera looked at her. I ran the name through the standard databases this morning, Dana said. Before last week, Sable Ivanova does not exist in any of them. Not a gap, not a shadow record, not an absence that suggests deletion, simply nothing, and then 7 days ago, a complete and fully realized identity that extends back through school records, medical history, and family documentation, with a kind of internal consistency that takes considerable time and expertise to construct. The same way mine does, Vera said. The same way yours does, Dana confirmed. Yes. Vera was quiet for a moment. She looked at the entrance to the McDonald's. The door, the parking lot beyond the glass, the gray afternoon. Does she know about Blackstone? Vera said. I don't know what she knows. Dana set her phone down. I don't know who sent her or what her brief is or whether we are on the same side of whatever arrangement she has been placed inside. I know that Moscow does not transfer students mid-semester to Connecticut prep schools without a reason that is not in the documentation. And I know that her file has the quality of professional construction rather than institutional record, which means she was placed here by someone who does the kind of work that produces that quality of file. Vera picked up the last chicken nugget from the container. She looked at it for a moment, then she set it back down. Where is she now? She said. Dana looked at her phone again. Based on the schedule she was given at enrollment this morning, she said she should currently be in this general area. After school transit time from Hargrove adjusted for the route she would logically take from the East Dormitory. Vera looked at the entrance. The door opened. She came in from the January cold with the particular quality of movement that Vera had spent 3 months trying to articulate precisely enough to teach the fluid load-bearing efficiency of someone whose body has been trained to move without waste, without announcement, without any component that did not serve a direct purpose. Not the grace of a dancer, which announced itself and was designed to be seen. Something quieter than that, something that was most visible in what it didn't do. She was 17, or appeared to be, dark hair cut simply and without apparent concern for appearance. A face that was composed in the specific way that faces are composed when composure is something learned rather than temperamental. She was approximately 5 feet 5 inches. She moved to the counter without looking at anyone in the restaurant in the way that people look at people when they are assessing a room. She looked at nothing, and in looking at nothing, she saw everything. And Vera recognized the technique because she used it herself. The girl ordered a coffee. Black, no sugar. She took the cup and chose a booth near the window, not the closest available, not the furthest. The one that gave her sightlines to the entrance. The side exit, the counter, and a partial angle on the back booth where Vera and Dana were sitting. She opened a book. Dana said quietly without looking up from her phone. She hasn't touched the coffee, I know, Vera said. The book was positioned at the precise angle that maximized the peripheral coverage of the window reflection to her right while appearing to be simply the comfortable angle of someone reading. Her left hand held the spine. Her right hand rested on the table fingers, relaxed, positioned in the specific way that required minimum movement to become useful quickly. A person reading a book held it differently. The weight distribution was different. The small adjustments people made as they progressed through pages produced a particular micro-movement pattern that was absent here. She was not reading. Vera stood. Dana looked up. "Give me 3 minutes," Vera said. She walked toward the door. Her path took her through the center of the restaurant, past the table with the two elderly men and their long, cold coffees, past the woman with the stroller, who was now eating past the counter, where the manager was restocking paper cup sleeves. She walked past Sable Ivanova's booth at a pace that was consistent with someone heading for the exit, close enough to the booth that she was briefly in the peripheral vision of the girl with the dark hair and the unread book. Close enough to see the wrist, the left wrist, partially covered by the cuff of a dark jacket. In the gap between the cuff and the table surface as Vera passed, a small section of skin was visible, and on that skin, two things. The first was a scar. Thin silver white with age running horizontally across the inner wrist at the precise position where the skin was thinnest and where a training blade during a specific defensive exercise performed in the early years of certain kinds of instruction sometimes made unplanned contact with a student who was learning the movement for the first time. Vera had the same scar on her own left wrist. She had gotten it at 12 years old during her third week of close-quarters knife defense training, when her footwork was not yet fast enough and her handler had not pulled the practice blade back quite in time. The second thing was a tattoo, small, precise, rendered in ink that was closer to dark blue than black in Cyrillic characters that were small enough to require proximity to read and placed in a position designed to be covered by a watch or a sleeve in any social context that made it inadvisable to display. Vera read it in the fraction of a second that her passage provided. 2 words. The first was a place. The second was a protocol designation. Athens Protocol. She went through the door and into the January cold. The parking lot held 8 vehicles. She stood near the entrance and let the cold settle around her the way she let information settle without rushing it, without imposing a shape on it before its own shape became apparent. Her breath made small clouds in the air and dissipated. The gray afternoon light was the same in every direction. Athens Protocol. She had heard the phrase once in a context she had not been meant to hear it. A phone call her father had ended with unusual speed when she entered a room in Brussels 14 months ago. A 2-word combination spoken by a voice on the other end that she had heard through the gap of a closing connection before the call terminated. She had filed it the way she filed everything, completely involuntarily, but without a context to attach it to. It had sat in the architecture of her memory as an unresolved entry, a reference without a document. She had not asked her father about it. She had learned early that there were categories of her father's work that asking about produced answers that were less accurate than the silence before the question. She had learned to gather information from the shape of silences rather than the content of answers. The shape of the silence around Athens Protocol in the 14 months since she had heard it had been specific. It was the silence of something that existed in a register parallel to the operations she knew about, neither inside them nor entirely separate from them. Not CIA, not FBI, not any of the formal structures that Dana Mercer's work lived inside. Something that used the same people, the same methods, the same infrastructure, in some places but existed in a space that had no official designation because it had been specifically designed to have none. A program that trained children who did not officially exist, whose records did not exist before their placement, who carried scars in the same position and knew the same techniques and had been built from the same materials by hands that answered to no charter that a congressional oversight committee would ever be permitted to examine. Her phone vibrated. She took it out. The number on the screen was not in her contacts, was not a number she had seen before, was formatted with a country code that did not correspond to any nation currently in her active operational geography. She answered it. Silence. Not the silence of a deadline, the listening silence of an open connection. Then a text arriving through a separate application that ran on the phone beneath the surface of its official operating system, an application that was not visible in any menu, that had no icon, that existed as a structural feature of the device's architecture rather than something installed on top of it. The text read, Phase 1 complete. Athens awaits. The message sat on the screen for 9 seconds. Then the application closed itself and the message was gone, and the application had been gone so completely that the memory allocation it had occupied for the duration of the message was already overwritten. She stood in the parking lot. Phase 1. 3 months of Hargrove, the Kaslov recruitment network, Roman Ashford and the 4 young men who had moved through their school like a weather system that everyone suffered and nobody stopped. The McDonald's, Dana Mercer and her FBI badge and her satellite feed and the symbol on the playing card. 43 arrests, the reorganization of an institution, the exposure of a senator, the dismantling of a system that had been operating for 4 years without meaningful consequence. Phase 1. If that was Phase 1, then the question was not what Phase 2 would require of her. The question was, who had designed Phase 1 in the first place? Who had seen Hargrove and the Kaslov network and a girl with a carefully constructed identity in a 6-month gap in her records and had understood that placing those things in proximity to each other would produce a specific outcome? Who had calibrated the variables with enough precision to know how it would end? Her father, possibly her father, or someone who had access to her father's understanding of what his daughter was, or someone who had been building something parallel to her father's understanding of what his daughter was for longer than either of them had known it was being built. Her phone vibrated again. Dana, the girl the message read is not in our system before last week. Identical construction to your file. I have 2 analysts running parallel traces on the documentation. Early indications suggest the construction methodology matches neither Project Haven nor any domestic program I have access to. Whoever built her identity built it with the same techniques your file uses, but from a different institutional origin point. Vera looked through the McDonald's window. From the parking lot at the angle she was standing, she could see Dana at the back booth with her tablet, and she could see Sable Ivanova in the booth near the window with her unread book and her untouched coffee and her Cyrillic tattoo. She could see both of them simultaneously, and she could see that Sable was looking at Dana with the same quality of non-looking assessment that Vera had seen from the inside since she was 11 years old. Sable was not here to assess Hargrove. Hargrove was finished. Whatever Hargrove had been, it was now a school with new administration and federal oversight and mandatory counseling and a reputation for something that it would spend years recovering from. Sable was here to assess Vera. She was here because Phase 1 was complete and someone needed to evaluate whether Vera Sinclair was what Phase 2 required her to be. Someone had sent a girl with a matching scar and a 2-word tattoo to sit in a McDonald's with an unread book and confirm from observation what a file could only approximate. Vera stood in the cold for another moment. She thought about Anna Volkov, 15 years old, moving between safe houses in Eastern Europe, never staying anywhere long enough to leave a shape in the air of a room. Never long enough to form the kind of connection that persisted past the end of a semester. Carrying a loss she had not chosen in a world she had not built with tools she had been given, because the people who loved her had not known how else to prepare her for what was coming. She thought about the gym at Hargrove, the 8 students who had come to learn something practical. The way they arrived in the early morning when the building was still cold and worked through the repetitions with the focused seriousness of people who had understood that knowledge of this kind was not abstract. The way they left each session slightly different from how they had arrived, carrying something that belonged to them now and could not be taken from them by institutional mechanism or social pressure or the proximity of someone larger. She thought about a corner table on the 2nd floor of a library, back to the wall with sightlines to both staircases and the emergency exit behind a portrait of the school's founder. She never sat with her back exposed. This was not going to change. She went back inside. The cold came in with her briefly and dissipated. She walked past the counter, past the 2 old men with their coffees, past the woman with the stroller. She walked past Sable Ivanova's booth, and this time she did not look at the wrist, and she did not look at the book, and she did not look at the untouched coffee. She looked at the face. For the 2 seconds that her path brought her within range of it, she looked directly at Sable Ivanova, and Sable Ivanova looked directly back at her, And what passed between them in those 2 seconds was not a conversation and not a signal and not a greeting. It was the particular exchange of two people who have both been trained to read the same things in the same ways, meeting each other's reading simultaneously, and understanding in the overlap of that simultaneity that the other person is exactly what the scar and the tattoo and the movement in the unread book suggested they were. Not an ally, not yet. Not an adversary, not yet. Something that had not been named because naming it would have required a category that neither the FBI nor Project Haven nor any formal institutional structure had developed adequate language for. Two instruments built for the same purpose by different hands. Vera sat down across from Dana. Dana looked at her. She is here to evaluate me, Vera said. She is not here as an asset. She is not here as a threat. She is a variable in something that is larger than Hargrove, and larger than Blackstone, and larger than the Kozlov network. She is here because the next thing, whatever it is, requires her to know what I am before she works alongside me or against me. Dana was quiet for a moment. And which of those is it? Vera looked at the folder on the table between them, the one with the photographs of Blackstone Preparatory with the network diagram and the financial records, and the three faces of students who had been administratively withdrawn and not found. I don't know yet, she said. That depends on who sent her and what they want from Blackstone. And if they want the same thing you want, then it won't matter who sent her. She picked up the folder. She opened it to the page with the campus map and looked at the grounds layout with the focused, systematic attention of someone who was beginning to build an architecture in their mind. Dormitory positions, administrative buildings, the athletic center's relationship to the perimeter, the sightline from the main academic building to the front gate. Dana watched her. You're 60 to 90 days for Anna Volkov, Vera said without looking up from the map. Start the clock today. Dana opened her phone and began typing. Vera turned to the next page of the folder. The financial records, the shell company diagram, the detective whose bank account had received payments 11 days before each close report. She read it with the steady building attention of someone who was no longer in the room she was sitting in, who had already moved forward into a place that existed only as a map and a set of unknown variables and the specific cold clarity of purpose. She was aware at the edge of her attention of the moment when Sable Ivanova stood from the booth near the window. She was aware of the fluid quality of the movement, the economy of it, the absence of any unnecessary component. She was aware of the direction Sable walked toward the door, not toward them as if the evaluation had been completed and the conclusion was sufficient and there was nothing more to observe. She was aware of the moment the door opened and the cold came in briefly, and then the door closed and the cold was gone. She did not look up from the financial records. Outside in the parking lot, Sable Ivanova walked to the edge of the pavement and stopped. She looked up at the gray Connecticut sky for a moment, and then she looked back through the McDonald's window at the girl in the back booth who was reading a file with the focused attention of someone becoming something. She took out her phone. She typed 3 words. Sent them to a number that was not in any directory and would not be for any duration that could be measured. Then she put the phone away and walked to the street and turned east toward the train station in the direction of whatever came next. Inside the McDonald's, Vera's phone received a notification from an application that had no icon and no visible existence in the device's official architecture. She looked at it. 2 words. She noted them. She filed them in the place where things that matter are kept alongside the color of her mother's cardigan, and the sound of a window breaking in Budapest, and the timestamp 3:56:14 p.m., and the weight of a plastic tray in a hand that knows exactly what to do with it. She deleted the message. She turned back to the map of Blackstone Preparatory. She was thinking about the dormitory layout, about the relationship between the athletic center and the perimeter fence, about a freshman who had been enrolled for 6 weeks before her file was administratively closed for reasons documented as a family emergency. She was thinking about what the word emergency meant in a document written by someone who had been paid to use it. She was thinking about exits. She was always thinking about exits. The January light outside the window was doing what January light does in Connecticut in the late afternoon, flattening, draining color, making the edges of things less distinct than they had been an hour earlier. The parking lot held fewer cars than it had when she arrived. The 2 elderly men near the front window had finally finished their coffees and left. The manager was running the evening checklist with the methodical efficiency of someone who had learned 3 months ago that methodical efficiency in advance of events was better than methodical efficiency in response to them. Dana closed her phone. The 60 to 90 days had been set in motion. The logistics were already in process in whatever invisible machinery Dana Mercer operated through. Anna Volkov, 15 years old, moving between safe houses, would begin moving toward a different kind of destination. A room that was hers. A name that stayed the name. A school where she would still know people in a year. Vera did not know Anna Volkov. She had never met her. She knew her name and her father's name and the shape of the life she was living because it was the shape of a life Vera understood from the inside, and because understanding something from the inside created a form of obligation that had nothing to do with assignment or instruction or the directives of any organization whose name appeared in federal documentation. She knew what it was to carry a loss you had not chosen in a world you had not built. She knew what it was to move through spaces where you were always the person who had just arrived and never the person who had been there long enough to mean something permanent. She did not know how to undo that for herself, but she knew now how to give someone else a different beginning. That was sufficient. She closed the folder and put it in her bag alongside the chemistry textbook, the pencil, the notepad. She zipped the outer pocket the way she always did, checking the closure once. She stood. She adjusted the strap of the bag on her shoulder. Dana stood as well. 3 weeks, Vera said. 3 weeks, Dana confirmed. At the door, Vera paused for 1 second. She looked back at the booth where they had been sitting, the plain table, the plastic seats, the surface where so many significant conversations had happened over the past 3 months, in a McDonald's on Post Road in Greenwich, Connecticut, in a space that was completely ordinary and had become in her internal architecture something else entirely. She looked at the Happy Meal container, the toy still in its wrapper. She left it on the table. Outside, the cold received her with the indifferent certainty of a January evening, the sky now fully committed to dark, the streetlights along Post Road coming on in sequence as she walked east. Her footsteps were even on the pavement. Her breathing was steady. Her eyes moved across the street, the parked cars, the pedestrians, the windows of the buildings she passed with the automatic continuous assessment that was simply what she was. She was thinking about Sable Ivanova and what 2 words meant when they came from a number with no origin. She was thinking about Blackstone Preparatory and a freshman whose file had been administratively closed and what the word emergency meant when it was written by someone who had been paid 11 days in advance to use it. She was thinking about a room in a safe house in Prague where a 15-year-old girl was preparing to move again, packing the things that fit in a bag that had been packed and unpacked enough times that the objects inside had worn small marks into the lining, and did not know yet that this time the destination would be different. She was thinking about exits the way she was always thinking about exits, because some things do not change, and she had stopped pretending they would. She turned the corner at the end of Post Road, and the McDonald's passed out of sight behind her, and the evening settled around her completely cold and clear and without sentimentality, and she walked forward into it with the steady, purposeful movement of someone who has understood for the first time in a long time exactly why she is walking. Phase 2 begins.